Large American online platforms have become seas of racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate in all its forms. And they're being used by criminals to harm our children. My government will act.
Over the weekend was World Press Freedom Day, which I checked is the kind of thing you would read about in the book 1984 as a celebration of censorship. They would call it World Press Freedom Day because it wasn't. It's the kind of thing that's only observed by regimes that do not actually have World Press Freedom Day every day. It's like that phrase, free speech zone, that you sometimes hear police or politicians talk about. Yeah, no, Canada is my free speech zone. There's a lot of lying about this sort of thing. How many politicians and journalists, for example, said that the trucker convoy was illegal? So many, too many to count, including Trudeau himself. But it was never found to be illegal by any court of law. The closest was one judge who ordered the truckers not to honk their horns, but that in no way rendered their being there illegal. The Emergencies Act itself operates underneath the Charter of Rights. It doesn't replace it or supersede it. There's no emergency exemption to the Charter. And even then, the CSIS Act, which explains a lot of terms in the Emergencies Act, it covers a lot of what happens in an emergency. They specifically exempt, quote, lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent, even under martial law. And as you know, a judge later found out that the invocation of the Emergency Act was illegal and unconstitutional, even though Mark Carney wrote in the Globe and Mail that he wanted it to go harder. And long digression there, but my point is, freedom is actually our default state, or it's supposed to be. It's our natural state. And even our laws reflect that. In the Soviet Union, a good rule of thumb was that if it wasn't specifically permitted, it was banned. But in Canada, and even more in the US, if something isn't specifically banned, it's permitted. It's a very different mindset. That's especially true when it comes to free speech and the U.S. First Amendment, of which I am so jealous. I'm pretty sure I've told you this story before about the famous U.S. case, Cohen versus California. It was in 1968, Vietnam War. A 19-year-old kid named Paul Cohen wore a T-shirt into a court saying F-U-C-K, the draft. And he was prosecuted, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, and they ruled in a split decision that it was protected speech, and that the profanity was, in fact, an important part of the message. If he had to say, excuse me, I politely disagree with the draft, that would not have been his honest message, would it? Anyways, of course, it's vulgar, but as the court wrote, quote, while the particular four-letter word being litigated here is perhaps more distasteful than most others of its genre, it is nevertheless often true that one man's vulgarity is another's lyric. There's some truth to it. I think that was probably the high watermark for free speech in America. I think the Supreme Court case itself was in 1971. So that's the United States. Canada does not have as much free speech, and we're losing more of it every day. We saw a lot of that during COVID, didn't we? But it's actually getting worse. Here is the Reporters Without Borders annual ranking. You can see that even according to this left-wing group, Canada has fallen from 14th place to 21st place in just 1 year. That's world rankings. But I read their report, and it's simply inaccurate. I mean, look at the bottom of that page. They say that 0 reporters have been arrested in Canada. But we both know that's not true. My friend David Menzies alone has been arrested 5 times in the last year. And I myself was arrested in January. And over the course of time, our people have been assaulted by police and others. So it's much worse than Reporters Without Borders says. About a year ago, I asked Mark Carney about David Menzies being arrested by Chrystia Freeland. I don't know if you remember, this was at the World Economic Forum. Here's what he told me. It was just over a year ago.
I'm enjoying it, and I'm doing my best to be fair and friendly.
If this was Canada, you could have him arrested.
Did you see that? Your rival, Chrystia Freeland, had one of our reporters arrested.
I don't think she did. I think
she didn't say a word against it.
On the incident, as you guys know very well, Canada is a rule of law country. Canada is a democracy. Operational decisions about law enforcement are taken by the police of jurisdiction. Quite appropriately, political elected officials have no role in the taking of those decisions, and that's why I don't have any further comment.
It was the wrong thing. It was absolutely the wrong thing.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Look, freedom of the press. I've been a public figure in Canada, been a public figure in the UK. I know you got to answer tough questions, and you guys, you ask tough questions, and that's fair.
Well, I want to thank you for saying that, because I have to say, Chrystia Freeland has not yet said anything in the vein that you have. She's been happy to let the cops do her work for her. And if she disagrees with the cops, she hasn't said so.
Well, I've said what I said. So, but look, the questions you were asking earlier about energy, and I'm going to have to.
All right, well, thanks for your time. I really appreciate.
Important, and I appreciate keeping.
Mark,
thanks.
come on. I feel like until next year, No.
Take care. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what he said then, but Mark Carney is prime minister now, and he's just the same. He has police push reporters away. He threatens us with arrest, and worse, he threatens entire media platforms. Listen to this.
Large American online platforms have become seas of racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate in all its forms. And they're being used by criminals to harm our children. My government will act. And today we're announcing our plan to fight crime, to protect Canadians, and to build communities that are safe, secure, and strong. A plan to make Canada secure, to make Canada strong.
Really? So racism, for example, won't be allowed online. He doesn't define what racism is. It's sort of tough these days. There's a lot of anti-white racism. It's official government policy. It's called DEI. What he really means is he doesn't like Elon Musk's Twitter, even though every other platform is just as bad or worse, including the Chinese Communist Party TikTok, which is avowedly pro-Hamas. But really, racism is a feeling. It's an accusation. Racist words are morally wrong, but they're not illegal for a whole bunch of obvious reasons. Since when does a prime minister simply get to ban words he doesn't like? Well, just like he gets to arrest journalists he doesn't like. There has never been more hate and racism on our city streets as there has been since October 7th. Weekly Hamas hate marches in Toronto alone. And the police couldn't care less. In fact, they're arresting reporters who dare to cover it, arresting peaceful counter-protesters. The police don't mind hatred and racism. They just want to use hate to demonize and denormalize their political opponents. Get a load of this official statement from Carney on World Press Freedom Day. So this was written, so they put a lot of thought in this. In this time of crisis, what crisis? Politicians love crises because it lets them do things in an emergency, don't they? We must protect what it means to be Canadian. A strong, independent, and free press both defines and defends our values. My new government will protect reliable Canadian public forums so we can tell our own stories in our own languages. Central to this work is strengthening our public broadcaster, CBC Radio Canada, which has stitched this nation together. Really? Did it do that? Reporting from Corner Brook to Trois-Rivières, Whitehorse to Comox, bringing Canadians together at critical moments. Does it really do that? Fewer than 1% of Canadians watch CBC News, by the way. My new government will also protect and fund more local news, including those with Indigenous perspectives. In a sea of foreign media and disinformation, we need Canadian voices more than ever. Unless they criticize them, in which case he wants to censor them. He says he wants an independent free press, but then he immediately said he's going to slather more money on the CBC. Which is it?
Canada's identity and institutions are under attack by foreign interference. And instead of defending them, Pierre Poilievre is following President Trump's lead and taking aim at our institutions like CBC Radio Canada. Pierre Poilievre pretends that you can keep one but not the other. But he's not Solomon. You can't split this baby. His attack on CBC is an attack directly on Radio Canada, and it is an attack on our Canadian identity. If elected, my government will take action to enshrine and protect and strengthen CBC Radio Canada for generations to come. We will modernize the mandate of our public broadcaster. We will give it the resources it needs to fulfill its renewed mission. and ensure that its future is guided by all Canadians and not subject to the whims of a small group of people led by ideology. When it comes to this most important of Canadian institutions, all Canadians should have their say, not just a small group. We will not only increase CBC Radio Canada's funding by $150 million, but we will also make this funding statutory, meaning that Parliament as a whole will need to approve any future changes to its funding, not just the Cabinet. By strengthening our public broadcaster, we're protecting our identity and our culture and helping it to shine.
And I think the scariest part there was the word reliable. What does it mean to be a reliable journalist? Trudeau used a similar word. He said trustworthy. He said only trustworthy journalists would get government money. Now, obviously, we want our news at Rebel News to be reliable and trustworthy, and I think every Canadian who reads the news, who watches the news, wants their news choices to be reliable and trustworthy. But what we mean by that is that we can rely on them. We can be our own judge of that. We want to trust the news. We don't want the government to vet them for us. We don't want the government to trust the news. We want the government to be a little bit afraid of the news all the time. When Trudeau and Carney say they want reliable media, what they mean is they want press secretaries, they want stenographers, they want people who are repeaters of their message. When they say trustworthy, they mean they don't want reporters jaunting off to the Isle of Man to dig up Mark Carney's shell companies hiding from taxes. They mean that Carney can trust the journalists to say nice things about him and mean things about his opponents. Do you remember when Rebel News and some other citizen journalists asked some questions in the political debates? Remember what the CBC said? That we were asking questions that were off topic or that were on different subjects, and they didn't like that one bit. Remember that CBC panel?
Just watching it, having watched the debate, David,
Yeah.
you know, the debate was one type of conversation. This feels very different.
I think the debate commission is going to need to be accountable for what's kind of happening here. They moved the time of the debate the day before. They kicked the Greens out the morning of, and they've opened up the scrums and the press access to a bunch of groups who sometimes are registered charities or have been defined by their owner as not actually a journalistic organization, or have been ruled by the federal court to not be a journalistic organization. And in an election like this one, with very substantive debate on very substantive issues, moderated very well and executed very well by all the leaders, this is where this is going. So look, the debate commission was set up to make this stuff run in a professional, coherent way, shifting the time for a hockey game, kicking out the Greens about a problem that has been known about for a week, and now this. I think I would like an explanation as a journalist. I think a lot of people at home would like an explanation as to why it happens this way. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the English debate tomorrow? But we've seen this, that they are talking about. There was immigration questions in the debate, a consensus on living up to the Safe Third Country Agreement. Can you really do that with an administration like the Trump administration right now, where you send people back when the foundational principle of the Safe Third Country Agreement is people you deny access at your border are going to get due process and proper legal treatment in the country you're sending them back to, when people are just being snatched and sent to. They sent an American citizen to Central America, and they're refusing to bring back. So there are substantive follow-ups on these things for these leaders. They only get 10 minutes, and it's being monopolized by people who are asking on issues that are not central to the campaign, and certainly were not central to this debate.
And we have about 30 seconds left. Anything of substance that you heard there policy-wise, or that you've heard tonight that you hadn't heard before?
Not in any of these scrums, because they are being taken over by other agendas, right? And not, I think, necessarily helping a broad swath of voters. Some people maybe do want to hear some of these questions and answers, but broadly, I don't think they represent sort of what the ballot box question is about. We can talk more, yeah.
Can you imagine that? Other journalists, government journalists, saying that our questions were not approved by them. We shouldn't ask them because they were not the right topics. That's what Mark Carney means by World Press Freedom Day. He means the opposite, just like Orwell did. Stay with us for more.